Welcome to the Expert Edge. This is the show where we bring on experts in their fields of health and wellness practice, and we hear their stories and we learn what they see working in the field of diabetes reversal and prevention. And I'm really happy to introduce today's guest, Mitch Webb. Welcome, Mitch.
Lucia, thank you so much for having me. My pleasure here.
Mitch Webb is a health coach and a nervous system expert who helps clients heal from the inside out. He works one-on-one with people dealing with gut issues, anxiety, autoimmune systems, fatigue, burnout, other chronic conditions like diabetes that haven't resolved through conventional approaches. He blends functional health principles with deep nervous system work to get to the root cause so that healing isn't just a quick fix, it's sustainable. So his approach is trauma-informed, body-based, and tailored to each individual. But I'd love to hear from you, Mitch. How did you get started with your interest in this intersection of lifestyle and health?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the intro and the opportunity to share. Where did I get started? I'd say this is a pain to purpose journey. When I was 20 years old, I fell out of a second story window, had a traumatic brain injury, and that kind of started everything. Maybe 6 months after that, started having autoimmune breakouts. I had plaque psoriasis over my entire body. I was having panic attacks, anxiety, insomnia. Got given some medication and went on my way. And then a couple years later, moved into a house that had black mold in it. I developed Lyme disease as well, which is a tick-borne illness.
Mm-hmm.
And when I made it to the functional medicine doctor, a holistic approach, like we were talking about hopping on, found out that I had heavy metals and metabolic issues. I was pre-diabetic, diabetic. I didn't, as you say, there wasn't a lot of symptoms for that, but had a lot of things going on. I reversed the diabetes. I detoxed the mold, the heavy metals, the Lyme disease, and then I got hit by a dump truck. And so I had a second round of post-concussion syndrome. As soon as I healed from that, I got long haul COVID 3 times in a row for 3 years. Okay. And so at this time in the journey, that's at 2020, 2023. I thought I just had a bad roll of the dice. And what I came to find out through this journey of understanding nervous system dysfunction, trauma, and how that plays a role, it was really this dysregulation that was in my nervous system, keeping me stuck and swinging between fight or flight and chronic freeze that was creating a lot of these symptoms. And it feels like they were kind of opportunities for me to really wake up and start listening to my body again, unpacking this trauma. And as I did that, I was able to eat foods again, was able to heal. Certainly lifestyle and diet and exercise and all that played a huge role. But what I'm seeing now is that the nervous system is a part of that as well. It seems like we like to really treat metabolic issues from the neck up. And so what I'm kind of bringing into the picture is let's include the whole body. And let's work with the body, the unresolved emotions, the symptoms, the sensations, all the things that we're dealing with. And I think that's a more comprehensive way of helping people move out of a dysregulated state. You can't heal your nervous system when it's running from a tiger, and same thing goes for your metabolism.
I love your story. I mean, I don't love all the things that happen to you and the many challenges that you face, but I think that many of our listeners can really relate, even if they haven't been through everything that you've experienced. Mm-hmm. Most often, I find people dealing with metabolic issues like obesity, prediabetes, or diabetes aren't dealing with that in isolation. Like, that's not the only thing that's going on in their bodies. And many times, I believe that health practitioners from a traditional approach look just at things like your blood sugar numbers and what are you eating and how much are you exercising, but may not pay a lot of attention to the role that our nervous system plays in this entire disease process. And so I'm really excited to have you here today to share with us some of the things you have learned through your own experience and through working as a health coach with people in dealing with a lot of different sorts of illnesses that share a root cause, which is that nervous system dysregulation. So I'd like us to start by talking a little bit about what have you seen between the blood sugar control and its connection to nervous system responses.
Absolutely. So, the nervous system is going to be responsible for controlling so many systems in the body, our immune system, our metabolic function, our hormones. And
Mm-hmm.
if we are dysregulated, that just means that we're stuck in our window of tolerance is where we're going to feel good, creative. Um, I always say effort feels easy. And when we get stuck out of that, that's when we're getting symptoms like anxiety. And on the other end of that would be freeze, where that's more of like a chronic shutdown. And so when we're in this state, this dysregulated state, our hormones, our excitatory neurotransmitters like adrenaline, cortisol, they're pumping. We're running from a tiger. There's a constant danger, and so that's kicking out inflammation, a steady supply of glucose. And so, yes, nutrition is a big part of this. But we want to go a little bit deeper and also see that if we're chronically running from a tiger, that's not a time to rest and digest. We're mobilizing blood sugar so that we can respond, so that we can fight, we can flight, we can flee. But if we're unaware of that and that's going on under the surface, there's no amount of nutrition and dieting and supplementation that's gonna connect, because we're in this survival mode. So we're more concerned about surviving instead of thriving. And I think if we can make that switch, we can bring more flow into the system. We can come back into that window of tolerance. We can reduce that dysregulation and bring on some more regulation. Well, I've seen clients not have to be so restrictive with their diet or really go after the exercise. We can kind of do all these things in balance and do what's right for the body when we're looking at this through a nervous system standpoint, because now I'm listening to my body and following my impulse, giving myself what I need, not going outside of my current capacity. And that way we can heal a whole lot quicker than relying on, what this person says how to eat and this person says how to exercise. It's really about being in our body, regulating, and then doing what our body needs. But we have to be able to listen to that first.
And I think that's one of the things that many people struggle with. I have seen people that do nothing but listen to their body, or so they think, and end up making choices that don't support them long term. But I think many more people ignore what they feel or sense in their bodies. And
Amen.
so, they're going to focus on, what am I putting on my plate? How much exercise am I getting? Am I working out at the gym every day? And not realize that even in the implementation of those things, as important as they may be doing it in a way that's actually increasing their stress levels and
Mm.
impacting their metabolism negatively. And so, as you talk about this regulation or dysregulation of the nervous system, explain a little bit more about what that means and how is that tied to what we commonly experience as stress.
Yeah, so I like to do the beach ball or the swimming pool analogy. And so if we've got a swimming pool, and you can imagine a bunch of little beach balls in there, and maybe there's a ton of beach balls and they're taking up a lot of space. And so those beach balls would represent unprocessed emotions, certain traumas that we didn't have the capacity to respond to in the moment. We weren't able to fight or flee. We had to shut down, and that's going into the freeze. It's playing possum and hoping the animal quits attacking us, right? And so we really just want to be aware of that, and we do that by tuning into the body and really slowing down, using our senses to feel our butt in the chair and feel what's going on. And over time, we can start to feel again instead of overriding these sensations. And really what I want to do with my clients is, I don't want to go in and pull the beach balls out, right? That's too much. that can really hurt people and cause more symptoms, more fear, more unsafety. And so we really want to titrate and go slow. And instead of going in and removing the beach balls, that's a more advanced approach. First, we want to build capacity to and to handle and sense and be with these sensations so we can start to meet them, attune to them, instead of pushing them away, suppressing them, avoiding them. And so what happens in the past, we're unaware of this stuff. And this dysregulation just means that we're stuck. So we're stuck in a really high sympathetic tone, whether we're in fight flight. So we may have symptoms like, stuff is running through our digestive system. We've got really high blood pressure. We've got anxiety. We've got a sense of danger all the time. We'll be hypervigilance. And, this term that I learned recently, I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's like constantly checking our symptoms. And so once you get into this world and maybe you know that you have metabolic dysfunction and you start to hear, oh, there's solutions and things that I can do, we get into this mode of wanting to fix instead of meeting our body and where it's at. And so that can be a younger part coming in and can actually keep us stuck because we're performing instead of being present, instead of meeting. I got to take my supplements. I got to eat like this. And certainly those are things that we want to do in the beginning. But if we feel like it's a have to, like it's a chore, like there's an agenda behind it, well, then we're just feeding that same lack of safety, that victim mentality, and we're doing it from the same place that created a lot of these issues. So we want to grow that swimming pool so that those beach balls start moving their way out. We can shift out of the high sympathetic charge or in the freeze. And as we do that, we come back more into our window of tolerance. We have more safety on board. And now we don't have to pump out a bunch of glucose and adrenaline. We feel safe. We feel present. Things feel easy and blood sugar tends to improve with that. Does that answer your question?
I love that. And I think that's really important for people to understand. And as you're talking about this nervous system, I just want to clarify for some people that maybe this is the first time you're hearing some of these ideas, that our nervous system has two primary modes of operation. We have the sympathetic nervous system, which is generally designed to be activated when we are in danger, like real physical danger. We're walking through the woods and we see a mountain lion. Okay, that's when our sympathetic nervous system is supposed to activate. We have the other half of the nervous system, which is what we call the parasympathetic nervous system. That is the part of our nervous system that controls things like our digestion, when we feel relaxed, when we're calm. And that's the one that we should be activating most of the time. But I think in much of our modern society, because of things we deal with, our environments, whether internal environment with toxins, accidents, injuries and disease, or external from pollution, other sorts of heavy metal toxicity, molds like you were mentioning, or other things that all of us are exposed to from time to time and sometimes chronically. So instead of our parasympathetic system being in control most of the time, for many of us today in modern society, our sympathetic nervous system is running more of the time. And so that's dysregulation. In other words, we have too much activation of the sympathetic nervous system and not enough of the parasympathetic. Am I explaining this correctly?
Yeah, and the way I think you're heading in this direction, that makes a lot of sense. The analogy I like to give is you kind of got the gas and the brakes on at the same time. So the nervous system is never like in a fixed state. It's kind of always changing, and it can be in a mixed state. So you're 100% there. If we're in sympathetic, we're in fight or flight, we're stuck up here. But if we stay here for too long in this really high activation, anxiety, stuff moving through your system really quick, not sleeping, not able to focus, then we have this really nice branch of our parasympathetic nervous system that is the high tone dorsal. It's kind of like the brakes. And so it's really smart. It's thank goodness that we have this as a protective mechanism. It comes on and says, hey, this guy's redlining. We can't stay in this amount of sympathetic activation for much longer. So we're going to bring the brakes on. Now,
Mm,
this brake is unmyelinated. It's really sloppy. An analogy of this my mentor gives is she was in a bad car accident and then was driving to the hospital and somebody slammed her hand in the door. Now, because
mm,
she's in that brake is on that high tone dorsal brake, she's shut down and not feeling anything.
mhm,
Okay.
mhm.
And so that shows if that's on as well, we can have all this sympathetic activation underneath that we're completely unaware of.
Yeah.
So not only do we have the gas on, so the sympathetic is still pinged, but now we have the brakes on as well. And what happens in your car if you're pushing both of those at one time?
It doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, the engine is revving. There's all this energy, but it's
Yeah.
being suppressed by this brake. And so that is a form of dysregulation, is being in both
Yes.
sympathetic activation and being in freeze.
Yes. And I appreciate you clarifying those kind of two aspects of the sympathetic nervous system, the brakes and the accelerator. And obviously, when they're both running at the same time, it really impacts our bodies physically. And so,
Mhm.
physically, it's when we experience more inflammation, more breakdown,
Yeah. Yeah.
more disease progression. And
Mhm.
we see things like cancer developing faster. We see things like diabetes. See things like Alzheimer's. They are all related to this underlying nervous system state. And and I think if we don't really pay attention to that and start thinking about and becoming more aware of what may have been very subconscious for us, then we can't deal with it as effectively. And part of it is, like you said, slowing down, being present, paying attention to the data that's actually coming into our brains from our bodies all the time through our senses that we
Yeah.
may be ignoring.
Yeah, when we have trauma, that's what we do. We
Yes.
don't want to feel that way. We want to avoid it. We want to fix it. We want to. Our society, we get taught early to if we got a cut, you fix it with a band-aid. You fix the boo-boo with the band-aid, and so we're so conditioned to rush in and to fix, and that's great. We want to
Mhm.
help our body and support it, but we want to meet it where it's at and attune. It's kind of like working with a child. Do you constantly fix a child, tell it what to do, force it, or do you allow it to be its own self, to tell you what's going on and support it in more of a nurturing way?
Yeah, that both of those aspects are important, aren't they? And
Mhm.
as we look at understanding more about these underlying things that may be pushing the symptoms or the complaints that we are experiencing and noticing, I think it's important for us to also be thinking about, well, when I become more aware of what's going on, that tightness in my stomach or that tension in my jaw or my neck, all of these things that can directly push blood sugars higher and higher, even without eating.
Yep.
What are some of the things we could do to manage our nervous system so it's better regulated and therefore help us have better blood sugar control?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So you're looking for tools of how we would begin to build capacity and regulate.
Yeah.
And number one, I'd say we really want to learn about titration and going really slow. Kind of like that beach ball analogy. We don't want to go in and start grabbing stuff and pulling it out. That'd be overwhelming to the system. It's kind of like rearranging the foundation of your system, of your house. You rip out the ground floor without a good foundation, well, the whole thing is going to collapse. And so we want to go slow. That's a real big part of it. We want to build capacity, and it starts by slowing down and creating awareness. So we have a tool that we call orienting, right? There's defensive orienting, which is we hear something and we jump, we react, or maybe we're at a baseball game and a pop flies hit our direction. We're going to protect ourselves, so we're just defensively orienting ourselves, and that's one way of orienting. And the other would be exploratory orienting. So really, if the listeners are listening right now, we can do a little bit, and that's just, can you feel your butt in your chair?
Hmm.
Can you be in the environment that you're in and check out a couple colors? Are there certain colors that you like that you're drawn to? And as you check out that color, what happens in your physiology? Now, in the beginning, nothing might happen, but and it may be scary to check into that if we haven't ever really brought in a lot of awareness. And so that's something to be aware of as well. But maybe eventually over time, you're like, wow, it really looks good when I'm checking out this blue that's in front of me. It's my favorite color. Maybe there's orienting to an animal, a pet. Usually I'm looking over here because I usually have my dog sitting in the in the floor with me, but we're feeling the wind on our back, the sun on our face, the feet in the ground, noticing how our breath changes as we do this. One of the most powerful things you can do is just sit and be. And like I said, that can be tough for those of us that have been looking at our phone and constantly doing. And our society is built on go 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 and chronic stress, and that's how we get burnout, ignoring the body and just putting our head down and charging forward. And so what I'm kind of offering here is just can we feel? Can we use our kinesthetic senses? Can we look around the room very slowly and orient and check out the tree that's outside of our window? Can we feel the temperature of the room that we're in and recognize that, hey, we're protected by the elements here in this room? So orienting is one. And the other one that I want to give to people is when we've oriented for a while. So these are practices that build. Um, Over time, orienting, you're going to start to notice things. Oh, you know what? I don't like being around this person. This thing that I do all the time, this pattern, it's not helpful anymore. So we learn to set boundaries. We learn to say no. We learn to communicate our truth instead of performing and overriding and people pleasing and being perfect. And we get to this place where we start to follow our impulse. Now, for me, that was one of the biggest steps coming out of chronic illness because I depended on everybody else to tell me the perfect diet, the perfect food, the perfect supplements. And I was really stressing to do all of this and get it all in. And if I didn't do everything right, I wasn't going to heal. And that's a trap. That's a trap when it comes to healing. And so we want to recognize that pattern and start to follow our impulse. What do you want to do? And now we kind of hit on that earlier. Certainly, there are unhealthy impulses. And we're going to, if it's, I want to get a donut every time I want to eat something, well, then that would be something to test. How do you feel after you do that? Maybe having one every now and then, no problem here. I used to be a perfect eater and I'm all about a treat here and there. But 80-90% of the time, those are not decisions that are in alignment with the energy I want to have for the day and how I want to show up and help my clients. And if I'm consistently feeling like crap after I eat or do a certain thing, well, then that's giving me feedback that this isn't for me. And so it's really learning to sense what our body wants. And through that process, that's how I healed and continue to heal, was listening to my body. A lot of time it was not conventional. It was different than what I thought was perfect. And that's part of the process is doing it your way. And certainly having a coach and someone to guide you through this is going to be really helpful. So it's going slow. It's bringing in the senses. It's learning to do things your way, and doing some trial and error to see what works. And I think having a coach and someone to bounce that off of, a therapist, can certainly be helpful in that regard.
I think it's really interesting. Several of the points that you brought up here as you were talking about ways to kind of be more present to what's going on around us and what we're actually feeling is that so many of your examples involve nature. And I
Mm.
really believe that nature was created by God to give us a place to really experience the pleasures of the breeze. This morning I woke up and there were so many birds singing outside of my window that I actually went and grabbed my app to identify what were all the songs. And there was like 8 different kinds of birds singing.
Wow.
And, and that sort of thing is what we were designed. It's like it reminds me that when God created man, he put him in a garden. And I really think that that he did that instead of putting him in a skyscraper or an apartment building or, it was a garden, because that's really where there's so much of this kind of positive input that we can enjoy in the sensory fashion and become really aware of what is happening around us without our minds racing into the troubles of the next day or
Mhm.
dwelling on the traumas of yesterday. It gives us some of that space, as you were talking about, to expand our bandwidth.
Mhm.
And that, one other piece that I picked up from what you were saying was how often we can actually stress ourselves, raise our cortisol levels, increase inflammation in our bodies when the mental attitude we bring to habit change or behavior change is, I have to do this or I have to do that. And I remember one of the keys that I learned around that was understanding that if I know this is something that actually would support my health, this is a great decision. Instead of saying I have to do this, it's just reframing it as I get to do this.
Mhm.
And it's so interesting how just a one word change in how we talk to ourselves completely changes the way we feel about it. Because
Mhm.
when we get to do something, right, it's like that's kind of, we talk about, I get to go on a vacation, I get to do things I enjoy, things that are good for me, things that are really going to support my long-term vision for health, rather than I have to or I
Mhm.
should, or it really, I think, does make a difference in how we walk through creating new habits as we learn about the things that work for our bodies. We really need to pay attention to how we talk to ourselves about the things we want to integrate. And I loved how you talked about, you know, I might feel right now in the moment, I want this donut, but then I get to really notice, how do I feel 10 minutes later? How
Mhm.
do I feel energy wise, going through my day when I had that big sugar spike? And if we actually become more present to that, then some of the appeal of some of those bad choices will actually diminish, I believe, because we will actually be conscious of the entire experience and not just the momentary experience. And that long view can go a long ways for us in health.
Oh yeah.
We talked earlier about how, as we're looking at the things that trigger stress for us, relationship issues that aren't resolved can be a big part of it. What do you see as you're working with people about that connection between relationships and this whole nervous system response?
Oh yeah. I mean, gosh, what's the quote? Who you spend the most time, the five people you spend the most time with is, how you become. And so, we all have to work, and sometimes that means putting ourselves around people and environments that we don't want to be around, and we can easily switch into some of these parts that protected us early on, like perfectionism and people pleasing, and we can say we can abandon ourselves and we can try to perform to stay in connection or receive love or attention, and we start to identify with these patterns, and so um, when we start to do this work, we really wake up to what feels good, what doesn't, and that certainly includes relationships. And so relationships get shaken up. A lot of relationships continue because they benefit from your protective mechanisms and getting that people pleasing and that perfectionism. And if we're constantly abandoning ourselves to stay in connection with others, well, then that's causing the things, the root cause of metabolic issues. That's inflammation, that's unsafety, and a lot of times that stuff's below the surface. And so when we start to wake up to this, we got to learn to set boundaries and say no, and say yes to the things that we do want. Relationships certainly change in this work. They have for me. There's some relationships that fell by the wayside, and could see that they were benefiting from me being in these protective patterns and constantly pleasing them. And so when I started saying yes to me and being more authentic and showing up as me, well, some people don't like that. And And then there comes boundaries and communication, and sometimes that doesn't go well. But what I would say is, when you do start listening to your body and you do surround yourself with people that you want to be around, that feel good for you, well, that's going to translate into your journey, your health journey as well. And more safety is first in this work, and it really depends on the people we surround ourselves, and that's a individual decision that every person is going to have to make for themselves. And I think with more awareness, that becomes easier.
And it's really interesting for me coming from a Christian perspective, how one of those really positive relationships in your life that can be huge in dealing with stress is if one of those relationships is your walk with God. When you know that you can trust Him, that you're completely safe with Him, you can be completely open and transparent and authentic, and He is there to accept and to love you, that can make a huge impact on the way you walk through the rest of your relationships as well. And all of this can be such a positive piece for healing and for health. And I love that you have a handout for our audience today. We're going to put the link for that in the description below this video, but tell us just a little bit about what people will get when they click on the link for the Break Free from the Jungle handout.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I appreciate that. The break through the jungle of stress is just learning some of these simple practices that I've talked about, following your impulse, orienting, and a step-by-step process to what that would look like, so you can start to sense what's going on in your body and your environment, and start to really sense those yeses, those nos, and make better decisions that ultimately bring on more safety in your nervous system. And I love that you highlight a higher power there, because ultimately trust equals safety, and
Mhm.
that's something that's a foundational piece, and a lot of the folks that I work with, and certainly myself.
Yeah, I love that. And I really appreciate what you've shared with us today. I think it's given us a lot to think about, and also some things to experiment with. How can we expand our bandwidth today? Because no matter where we are in this journey, there's always room for growth. And so I just really appreciate you sharing your experience with us today and some of these great tips for how we can work together with our nervous system to experience healthier metabolism and a healthier body. And for all of you that are listening today, remember, health is wealth, and it comes by choice, not by chance. Thank you for being with us here today.